My name is Agnes Wright, 58 years old, and I never thought my only son's wedding would turn into the most humiliating day of my life. When I arrived at the reception and saw a metal trash can where my seat should have been with my name taped to it, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The worst part wasn't the cruel prank itself, but James standing silently beside his new bride as she said those dismissive words to me. "It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic." If only they knew the secret I was carrying that day, a truth that would turn their perfect wedding into the beginning of the end. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please subscribe if you believe that family love should never come with disrespect attached. Life in our small Texas town had always been predictable, comforting in its familiarity. The same families had lived here for generations, watching each other's children grow, celebrating milestones together, and supporting one another through hardships. I was born and raised here, married my high school sweetheart, Thomas Wright, and we built our modest but happy life together. For 30 years, I worked as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital, caring for countless members of our community. I loved my job, the connection with patients, the feeling of making a difference, the respect I earned through decades of dedicated service. When Thomas passed away 7 years ago from a sudden heart attack, my colleagues became my support system, helping me navigate the overwhelming grief of losing my partner of 35 years. Thomas was everything a woman could want in a husband, kind, hardworking, with a quiet humor that could lighten even the darkest moments. He worked as a construction foreman, building many of the homes in our expanding town. His hands were always rough, marked with calluses and small scars from years of manual labor, but they were the gentlest hands when they held mine. "Agnes," he'd say every morning before heading to work, "you make waking up the best part of my day." Even after 3 decades of marriage, he never stopped making me feel special, never took me for granted. Our greatest joy was our son, James. From the moment he was born, he was the center of our universe. Thomas taught him how to fish, how to fix things around the house, and most importantly, how to be a man of integrity. I taught him compassion, the value of education, and made sure he knew he was loved unconditionally. James grew up to be everything we hoped for: intelligent, kind, and thoughtful. He excelled in school, earned a civil engineering scholarship, and followed somewhat in his father's footsteps, though with more letters after his name. After college, James took a job with a respected engineering firm in Dallas, about an hour's drive from our town. He would come home most weekends, and we maintained our close relationship even after Thomas died. James was my rock during that difficult time, calling me daily, helping with household repairs, and making sure I wasn't drowning in loneliness. Dad would want us to stick together. He'd say his father's expressions sometimes flickering across his face, making my heart ache with both loss and gratitude. Then 3 years ago, everything changed when Stephanie entered our lives. I still remember the Sunday afternoon when James brought her home to meet me. She arrived in an expensive car dressed impeccably in designer clothes that seemed excessive for a casual family lunch. Her perfectly manicured hand extended to me with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "So, this is where James grew up?" she said, glancing around our modest home with barely concealed judgment. "It's so quaint." Throughout that lunch, Stephanie dominated the conversation, talking extensively about her job as a marketing executive for a luxury brand, the important people she knew, and her ambitions for the future. When I tried to share stories about James's childhood, she would politely listen for a moment before steering the conversation back to herself. James seemed different around her, less relaxed, constantly seeking her approval, laughing too loudly at her jokes. As they were leaving, I hugged James and whispered, "She's certainly confident." It was the kindest thing I could think to say. "Isn't she amazing, Mom?" he replied, his eyes following her to the car. "She's going places, and she wants me with her." Within 6 months of dating, Stephanie James's weekend visits became less frequent. His daily calls turned into occasional texts. When I called him, he often seemed rushed, or said he'd call back later, which he rarely did. When I did see him, Stephanie was always there, her arm linked possessively through his, her influence evident in his new expensive clothes, his changed haircut, even the way he spoke. I tried to maintain our connection, inviting them for Sunday dinners, sending care packages to their apartment suggesting mother-son activities like we used to enjoy. But Stephanie always had reasons why James couldn't make it. Work commitments, social obligations with her friends, or plans they'd already made. James is establishing his career in our social circle, she told me during one phone call. He doesn't have time to drive out to the middle of nowhere every weekend anymore. The few times they did visit Stephanie found ways to make me feel insignificant. She would make comments about my home being stuck in the past, or suggest that my clothes were outdated. She'd correct my grammar or exchange knowing looks with James when I mentioned local town gossip. "Agnes," she'd say, never calling me Mrs. Wright or anything more respectful, "you really should update your kitchen. These oak cabinets scream 1990s. Or, "Agnes, no one wears that style anymore. I should take you shopping sometime and help you look more current." James never defended me. Instead, he'd chuckle uncomfortably or change the subject. Sometimes he'd say, "Mom, Stephanie just wants to help," as if I should be grateful for her condescension. The jokes started about a year into their relationship. At Thanksgiving dinner at my house, Stephanie deliberately set the table with a child's plastic cup at my place setting. "Since Agnes is the oldest, I thought she might have trouble with the crystal," she explained to my confused neighbor whom I'd invited so I wouldn't be the third wheel. Everyone laughed, including James, while I forced a smile and quietly replaced it with a proper glass. At Christmas, she gave everyone thoughtful, expensive gifts, but handed me a package that contained anti-aging cream and a book titled Coping with Senior Moments. "Just thinking ahead," she said with a wink to James. "We need to keep Agnes sharp." I opened my mouth to object, but James quickly interjected. "Mom's got a great sense of humor. She can take a joke, right, Mom?" What could I do but nod and pretend I wasn't hurt? I didn't want to risk pushing my son further away. Then came the announcement of their pregnancy. I was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. Imagining a grandchild might bring James back into my life more regularly. When Jason was born, I rushed to the hospital with gifts and a heart full of love, only to be told by Stephanie that they were limiting visitors to avoid germs. I wasn't allowed to hold Jason until he was 2 weeks old, and even then, Stephanie hovered nervously, as if I might drop him. My offers to babysit were consistently declined. My suggestions about care were dismissed as outdated. When I knitted a baby blanket, Stephanie mentioned that Jason had sensitive skin and needed hypoallergenic organic materials. Despite all this, I fell in love with little Jason the moment I saw him. He had James's smile, I thought, though, as he grew. I couldn't help but notice he didn't resemble our family much at all. He had none of Thomas's distinctive cleft chin that James had inherited, none of my auburn hair that had shown up in James despite Thomas's darker coloring. Jason's eyes were a striking green, unlike anyone in our family's brown or blue. "He looks just like my side," Stephanie would say whenever anyone commented on who Jason resembled. My father had these exact same eyes. I pushed away the small doubts that occasionally surfaced. After all, genetics are complicated, and I'd seen enough family surprises in my years as a nurse to know that children don't always resemble their parents. What I couldn't ignore, however, was how Stephanie used Jason as another way to exclude me. Visits were strictly scheduled and often canceled at the last minute. I was allowed to buy gifts, but criticized if they weren't from the approved list Stephanie provided. My knowledge as a former pediatric nurse was dismissed as not relevant to modern childcare. When Jason turned 2, I was invited to his birthday party, a lavish affair with a professional photographer, catered food, and expensive decorations featuring a cartoon character I didn't recognize. I arrived early to help, but Stephanie quickly informed me that everything was under control. "We've hired professionals, Agnes," she said, directing me to a chair in the corner. "Just relax and try not to get in the way." Throughout the party, I sat alone watching other guests, mostly Stephanie's friends and their children, interact with my grandson while I remained an outsider. When I finally got a moment with Jason, approaching him with the handmade wooden train set I'd spent weeks having custom made by a local craftsman, Stephanie swooped in. "Oh, we're not doing gifts yet," she said, taking the package from my hands. Later, when gifts were opened, mine was somehow misplaced and never presented. James noticed my hurt expression and came over briefly. "Mom, you know how these big parties are. Steph is just stressed making sure everything's perfect." "She doesn't want me here, James," I said quietly. "She never has." "Don't be dramatic, Mom," he replied, the same dismissive phrase I would hear again at their wedding. "Stephanie respects you. She just has her own way of doing things." It was that evening, watching Stephanie's father play with Jason, that the first serious doubts crept in. Her father's green eyes matched Jason's exactly. But so did the eyes of the man who kept looking over at Stephanie throughout the party, a handsome man introduced only as David, an old friend from college. I noticed the lingering glances between Stephanie and David, the way they seemed to find reasons to speak privately, the slightly too long hug when he departed. I noticed, too, how David looked at Jason with an expression of longing that seemed out of place for a mere family friend. On the drive home that night, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I had been subconsciously avoiding. What if Jason wasn't James's son at all? When James and Stephanie announced their wedding plans, I was genuinely surprised. They had been living together for 3 years, already had a child, and Stephanie had never expressed interest in traditional commitment. In fact, she had often made dismissive comments about marriage being an outdated institution and just a piece of paper. The announcement came during one of my rare visits to their sleek, modern apartment in an upscale Dallas neighborhood. Everything in their home was minimalist, expensive, and perfectly coordinated, a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in feel of the house where James grew up. "Mom, we have some news," James said, reaching for Stephanie's hand across their glass dining table. "We're getting married in 3 months." 3 months? I echoed, surprised by the short timeline. "That's wonderful news, but why the rush?" Stephanie's smile was tight as she explained, "We've secured the Westlake Country Club for June 15th. It was a last-minute cancellation, and those spots are impossible to get. We had to jump on it." "The Westlake Club?" I asked, knowing it was one of the most exclusive venues in the area with memberships that cost more than my yearly nursing salary had been. "That sounds expensive." "We can afford it," Stephanie said dismissively. "James just got a promotion and my parents are contributing." James looked uncomfortable at this mention of money but nodded enthusiastically. "We want to make it official, Mom. Do things the right way, you know." There was something in his tone that made me wonder if this wedding was truly his idea, or if he was being pressured into it. But I pushed the thought aside, determined to be supportive. "I'm so happy for you both," I said sincerely, reaching across to squeeze James's hand. "What can I do to help?" Stephanie answered before James could. "We've hired a wedding planner. Everything is under control." Over the next few weeks, I tried repeatedly to be involved in the wedding preparations. I called the wedding planner a brittle woman named Veronica, who seemed annoyed by my very existence, offering to help with anything from addressing invitations to arranging flowers. "And Mrs. Right," Veronica said, her voice dripping with forced patience. "Stephanie has been very clear about her vision. We have professionals handling all aspects of the event." I tried a different approach, calling James directly to offer financial assistance. Thomas and I had saved modestly throughout our lives, and I had a small nest egg that I'd always intended to use for James's wedding. "James, honey, I'd like to contribute to the wedding costs. Your father and I always set aside money for this day." There was a pause on the phone, and I could hear muffled voices as James presumably discussed this with Stephanie. "Thanks, Mom," he finally said, "but we've got it covered. Steph's parents are handling the big expenses, and I've got the rest." "Are you sure?" I pressed. It would mean so much to me to contribute something. Maybe I could pay for the flowers or the cake? Another pause, more muffled conversation. Stephanie says the flowers and cake are already taken care of. Her mother has very specific ideas. I tried one more angle. What about your bachelor party? I could help plan something with your old friends from home. James's laugh sounded forced. Steph's brother is handling all that downtown thing with his finance buddies. But thanks for offering. It became painfully clear that there was no role for me in this wedding. No mother of the groom duties, no input on traditions or ceremonies, no acknowledgement of the family James came from. The formal invitation arrived 3 weeks before the event. Thick cream cardstock with gold foil lettering announced the union of Stephanie Ann Morris and James Thomas Wright at the Westlake Country Club. The invitation was addressed only to Agnes Wright, with no +1 option, despite the fact that I had been seeing Walter, a kind widower from my church group, for several months. I called James about the oversight. "Oh, sorry about that, Mom," he said. "The thing is, we're really limited on space and trying to keep numbers down." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "I just thought it might be nice to have someone to sit with since I won't know many people there." "You'll be at the family table," James assured me. "You'll be fine." A week later, I received an email from Veronica with the schedule for the rehearsal dinner and ceremony. I was not included in the rehearsal dinner guest list, which seemed odd for the mother of the groom. When I called to inquire, Veronica explained that the dinner was intimate and limited to the wedding party and the bride's immediate family. "But I'm the groom's immediate family," I protested. "I'm just following the approved list," Veronica replied coolly. "You're definitely included in the ceremony and reception the following day." I swallowed my hurt and focused on finding the perfect outfit for my son's wedding. I splurged on a tasteful blue dress from an upscale department store in Dallas, had my hair done at the local salon, and even treated myself to professional makeup application, something I hadn't done since Thomas and I renewed our vows for our 30th anniversary. 2 days before the wedding, I was in town running errands when I passed by Layla's bridal boutique. Through the window, I spotted Stephanie with an older woman who I recognized as her mother from photos. They were looking at mother of the bride dresses. On impulse, I went inside thinking perhaps we could make it a joint shopping trip, a chance to bond before the wedding. Stephanie's face froze when she saw me, her perfect smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered. "Agnes?" "What a surprise," she said, air-kissing near my cheek. "Have you met my mother, Patricia?" Patricia Morris was a taller, older version of Stephanie with the same calculating eyes and practiced smile. She extended a manicured hand. "Agnes, of course. Stephanie has told me so much about you." Something in her tone suggested that what she had heard wasn't entirely positive. "I was just passing by and saw you two," I explained. "I've already found my dress for the wedding, but I thought I'd say hello." "How wonderful," Patricia said without asking anything about my chosen outfit. "We're just finalizing Stephanie's mother of the groom dress. The pale gold will complement her coloring perfectly." I blinked in confusion. "Mother of the groom? But I'm James's mother." There was an awkward pause before Stephanie laughed lightly. "Oh, Mom means she's picking a dress appropriate for the mother of the groom to wear. You know, since we're all going to be family now." It was a weak explanation, but I nodded, not wanting to create a scene. As I turned to leave, I overheard Patricia whisper to Stephanie, "Is that what she's wearing to the rehearsal dinner? It's a bit casual." I glanced down at my simple slacks and blouse, then realized with a sinking heart that they thought I was coming to the rehearsal dinner after all. Had plans changed? Had James forgotten to tell me? Outside the boutique, I called James immediately. "Honey, I just ran into Stephanie and her mother shopping for dresses. There seems to be some confusion about the rehearsal dinner. Am I invited now?" James sighed heavily. "Mom, I'm really sorry. I meant to call you. Yes, you can come to the dinner. Steph's parents insisted on including you when they found out you weren't on the list. It was an oversight. An oversight. His only parent overlooked for the rehearsal dinner of his wedding. I fought back tears as I thanked him for the inclusion, hating how grateful I felt for being allowed to attend my own son's rehearsal. The next day, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Agnes, this is Veronica, the wedding planner. Regarding tomorrow's rehearsal dinner at La Maison, dress code is formal. Arrivals begin at 7 p.m., dinner at 7:30. Please arrive promptly as the schedule is tight. No warmth, no excitement about the upcoming celebration of my only child's marriage. Just clinical instructions as if I were any other guest. That evening, I was folding laundry while watching television when a commercial for a DNA testing service came on. The advertisement showed family members discovering surprising heritage connections to distant relatives and unexpected genetic traits. I sat frozen, a half-folded towel in my hands, as the doubt that had been growing in my mind solidified into a plan. I immediately went online and ordered an express DNA test kit, paying extra for overnight delivery and rush processing. The next morning, the kit arrived as promised. I knew what I needed to do, though the ethics troubled me. At Jason's last birthday party, he had dropped his juice cup. I had picked it up and noticed he'd left his sippy cup in my car during their last visit. I still had it unwashed in a cabinet. It wasn't ideal, but it might work. I carefully followed the instructions using the swab on the sippy cup's mouthpiece, then on the inside of my own cheek for comparison. I packaged everything according to directions and paid for same-day courier service to the lab along with their fastest processing option. The results would be emailed to me the morning of the wedding. As I sealed the package, I questioned my actions. Was I crossing a line, violating privacy? But then I remembered the years of disrespect, the gradual loss of my son, the strange resemblance between Jason and family friend David. I remembered, too, the trash can that would be waiting for me at the wedding, though I didn't know it yet. I called my friend Helen, the one person who had known me since nursing school, and would give me honest advice. "Helen, I've done something I'm not sure about," I confessed, explaining the DNA test. "Oh, Agnes," Helen sighed. "That's a big step. What are you going to do with the results?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I just need to know the truth. James deserves to know if the child he's raising isn't his." "And if the test shows Jason is his," Helen asked. "Then I destroy the results and never mention it," I said firmly. "It will be my cross to bear for doubting them." Helen was quiet for a moment. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you. But Agnes, be careful. This kind of truth can explode families." "This family is already broken," I replied sadly. "James just doesn't see it yet." That night, I lay awake thinking about Thomas. What would he advise if he were here? Thomas had always valued honesty, but he also believed in handling difficult truths with compassion. He wouldn't want his son deceived, living a lie, but he also wouldn't want to cause unnecessary pain. "Guide me, Thomas," I whispered into the darkness. "Help me do the right thing." I didn't yet know that the next day would force my hand in ways I couldn't imagine, that humiliation would push me past the point of caution. I didn't know that a metal trash can with my name on it would become the catalyst for revelations that would change all our lives forever. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day that should have been filled with joy and anticipation. I woke early, my stomach knotting with a mixture of emotions. Happiness for James, anxiety about seeing Stephanie and her family, and dread about what the DNA results might reveal. I checked my email first thing, but the test results hadn't arrived yet. The lab had promised delivery by 9 a.m., so I tried to distract myself with wedding preparations. I styled my hair carefully, applied my makeup with precision, and slipped into my new blue dress that had cost more than I'd spent on myself in years. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman trying her best to be worthy of standing beside her son on his wedding day. My hair had more gray than brown now, and the lines around my eyes had deepened since Thomas died. But I had maintained my figure through regular swimming at the community center. The dress flattered my shape, and the color brought out the blue of my eyes. Thomas's favorite feature of mine. "You would be proud of him, Thomas," I said to my reflection, imagining my husband standing behind me as he so often had when we were getting ready for special occasions. "He's built a good career just like you wanted." I didn't voice my concerns about the rest of James's life choices. Today wasn't the day for doubts. At precisely 9:03 a.m., my phone chimed with an email notification. Heart racing, I opened the message from Rapid Genetic Testing Services. I had to read the results twice to fully comprehend what I was seeing. Based on analysis of 37 genetic markers, the probability of first-degree relationship parent-child between sample A adult and sample B child is 0.00%. No genetic relationship detected. I sat heavily on the edge of my bed, the phone trembling in my hand. The test confirmed my suspicions. Jason was not James's biological son. There was no genetic connection between my family and the little boy James had been raising as his own for 2 years. I forwarded the email to my personal account, then took screenshots and saved them to my phone. Part of me hoped I would never need this information, that I could find a private moment to talk with James after the honeymoon, gently breaking the news. Another part of me suspected that moment would never come, that Stephanie would ensure I never had enough time alone with my son for such a conversation. Putting the phone aside, I finished getting ready and drove to the Westlake Country Club. The sprawling complex was even more impressive than I had imagined. Manicured gardens, a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers and panoramic views of the lake. Luxury cars filled the parking lot, and staff in crisp uniforms directed guests to the ceremony location. I arrived an hour early, hoping to see James before the ceremony. The wedding planner, Veronica, intercepted me at the entrance to the groom's suite. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wright, but we're running behind schedule. James is still getting ready, and we need to keep things moving." "I just want 5 minutes with my son before the ceremony," I pleaded. "Perhaps after the ceremony," she suggested, already turning to address another issue with a staff member. Relegated to waiting with the other guests, I took a seat in the last row of white chairs arranged for the outdoor ceremony. I didn't recognize anyone around me. These were Stephanie's colleagues, her parents' friends, her social circle. Where were James's childhood friends, his college roommates, his colleagues from work? It was as if his life before Stephanie had been erased. The ceremony itself was beautiful in a sterile, magazine-perfect way. Everything coordinated in shades of gold and cream, professional musicians playing classical pieces, flower arrangements taller than me. James looked handsome in his tailored tuxedo, though his smile seemed tight as he waited at the altar. When Stephanie appeared in a designer gown that probably cost more than my car, the assembled guests gasped appreciatively. I watched my son pledge his life to a woman who had systematically separated him from his past, who was letting him raise another man's child without his knowledge. Tears ran down my face, not the joyful tears of a proud mother, but tears of grief for the deception and the distance that had grown between us. After the ceremony, guests were directed to the ballroom for the reception. Tables were adorned with elaborate centerpieces, gold chargers, and personalized place cards. I searched for my name among the family tables at the front, but found nothing. Confused, I approached a young woman with a clipboard who appeared to be one of the wedding staff. "Excuse me, I'm Agnes Wright, the groom's mother. I can't seem to find my seat." She consulted her list, flipping several pages with a frown. "Right? Agnes, you're at table 19. "Table 19, I repeated, looking at the ballroom layout displayed on an elegant sign. Table 19 was in the very back corner of the room, far from the head table where James and Stephanie would sit. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I'm the groom's mother." The young woman looked uncomfortable. I'm just following the seating chart approved by the bride. Table 19 is what's listed. Swallowing my hurt, I made my way to the back of the ballroom. Table 19 was indeed in the farthest corner, partially hidden behind a large column. As I approached, I noticed something odd. The table was set for 8 people with elegant place settings at 7 of the seats. At the 8th position, where a chair should have been, stood a metal trash can with a handwritten sign taped to it that read, Agnes. I stopped, certain I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. This couldn't possibly be intentional. Perhaps it was a service station that hadn't been removed. Perhaps my actual seat was elsewhere. But as I stood there frozen in disbelief, I heard snickering from a nearby table. Looking over, I saw Stephanie's bridesmaids watching me poorly, concealing their amusement behind manicured hands. One of them, a tall blonde I recognized from photos as Stephanie's college roommate, actually pointed at me and whispered to her companion. My cheeks burning with humiliation, I turned to find someone in authority who could fix this obvious mistake. Instead, I came face to face with Stephanie, radiant in her wedding gown, holding James's arm. Agnes, she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I see you found your seat. There's a trash can where my chair should be, I said quietly, not wanting to create a scene at my son's wedding, despite the rage and hurt building inside me. Stephanie laughed lightly. It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic. She looked at the gathering crowd of guests, many of whom were now watching our interaction with interest. Agnes has been so uptight about the wedding plans, we thought she needed something to lighten the mood. Several people laughed, including members of the bridal party who had clearly been anticipating this moment. I looked at James, silently pleading for him to say something to defend me, to be the son I had raised. He smiled uncomfortably and patted my shoulder. It's just a bit of fun, Mom. We'll get you a real chair. Don't make a big deal, okay? In that moment, seeing my son side with someone who would publicly humiliate his mother, something broke inside me. The DNA test results burned in my mind like a brand. This woman had not only taken my son from me, but was now making me an object of ridicule at what should have been one of the most important family celebrations of our lives. And she was letting James believe he was a father to a child who wasn't his. A waiter, looking embarrassed on my behalf, quickly removed the trash can and brought a proper chair. I sat through the reception in a fog of hurt and anger, barely touching the gourmet meal placed before me. I was seated with distant acquaintances of the bride's family who clearly had no idea who I was or why I was at their table. No one from the wedding party came to speak to me. James caught up in the celebration, and his new wife didn't approach me again. During the toasts, Stephanie's father gave a speech praising his daughter's accomplishments and welcoming James to their family. The best man, Stephanie's brother, not any of James's longtime friends, told jokes about how James had upgraded when he met Stephanie. Then Stephanie herself took the microphone. I'd like to thank everyone for coming to celebrate with us today, she began, especially those who had to travel. She paused for effect. Some even had to travel all the way from the last century. Laughter rippled through the room as her eyes flickered briefly toward me. She continued with several more thinly veiled comments about old-fashioned opinions and making room for new traditions by throwing out the trash. Each word was a dagger, but I maintained my composure, years of nursing training helping me keep a neutral expression. Inside, however, a resolve was hardening. This woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation was also perpetuating a far more serious deception. James deserved to know the truth, even if it would hurt him, even if it meant he might blame me for revealing it. As the dancing began, I quietly gathered my purse and wrap. No one noticed as I slipped out of the ballroom. There would be no mother-son dance. That tradition had been eliminated from the program I'd learned earlier. My presence or absence would make no difference to the rest of the evening's festivities. In the quiet of my car, I finally allowed the tears to come. I cried for the son who no longer saw me, for the grandchild who wasn't really mine, for the lonely years ahead, as I aged without family support. I cried too for Thomas, grateful that he hadn't lived to see the gulf that had formed between us, and the son we had raised with so much love. When the tears subsided, I checked my phone and found 3 missed calls from Helen. I returned her call immediately. "Agnes, how was the wedding?" she asked. "They put a trash can in my place at the table," I said, my voice hollow. "With my name on it." Helen gasped. "They did what? That's not a joke, that's cruelty." "And the DNA test results came back," I continued. "Jason isn't James's son." There was a long silence before Helen spoke again. "Oh, Agnes, what are you going to do?" I started my car, decision made. "I'm going to the post-wedding brunch tomorrow, and I'm going to tell my son the truth." When I arrived home that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of the day's humiliation and the difficult task ahead. I checked and rechecked the DNA results, hoping somehow I had misread them, that there had been a mistake. But the conclusion remained unchanged. No genetic relationship existed between my family line and little Jason. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, nursing cups of tea that grew cold, before I remembered to drink them, rehearsing what I would say to James. I considered every angle, every possible reaction. Would he believe me? Would he hate me for being the messenger? Could his marriage, less than 24 hours old, survive this revelation? The post-wedding brunch was scheduled for 11 a.m. at an upscale restaurant attached to the country club. It was primarily for out-of-town guests and the wedding party, but all family members were expected to attend. After the trash can incident, I had briefly considered skipping it altogether, but the truth sitting heavy in my heart wouldn't allow me to stay away. I dressed carefully in a simple peach dress with a light cardigan, applied minimal makeup to hide the evidence of my sleepless night, and drove back to the Westlake Country Club. The morning was overcast, the promise of the previous day's perfect weather fading as clouds gathered on the horizon. It felt appropriate, somehow a reflection of the storm I was about to bring. The restaurant was elegant with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. Round tables were set with white linens and fresh flowers, while a buffet of gourmet breakfast foods lined one wall. About 40 people were already present when I arrived, including James and Stephanie at the center table, surrounded by her family and the bridal party. Jason sat in a high chair between them, looking adorable in a tiny button-down shirt that matched the groomsmen's attire from yesterday. My heart ached looking at him. Innocent in all this, a child who would be affected by the truth I carried. I took a deep breath and approached their table. Stephanie saw me first, her smile faltering slightly before she composed herself. "Agnes, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting she had hoped otherwise. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied evenly, leaning down to kiss James's cheek. He accepted the gesture somewhat stiffly, clearly, still uncomfortable about the previous day's incident. "Did you find a place to sit?" Stephanie asked, not offering me a spot at their table despite several empty chairs. "Not yet," I admitted. "I wanted to say good morning first." "Well, I think there's space at that table by the window," she said, pointing to the furthest corner of the room. I nodded, but didn't move away immediately. "Actually, I was hoping I might say a few words to everyone before the brunch gets fully underway. Just a mother's blessing for the newlyweds." Stephanie's eyes narrowed slightly, but with so many witnesses, she could hardly refuse such a traditional request. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the small microphone set up near the buffet that had been used earlier for welcoming remarks by the restaurant manager. I made my way to the microphone, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The room gradually quieted as guests noticed me preparing to speak. James looked confused but managed a small, encouraging smile. "Good morning, everyone." I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "For those who don't know me, I'm Agnes Wright, James's mother." I saw a few puzzled looks among guests who had been at the reception, likely wondering why the woman relegated to the trash can seat was now addressing the gathering. I wanted to take a moment to congratulate James and Stephanie on their marriage, I continued. As a mother, you dream of the day your child finds someone to build a life with, someone who brings out the best in them and supports their growth. Stephanie beamed clearly, assuming this was going to be a standard complimentary speech. When Thomas, my late husband, and I raised James, we tried to instill certain values in him: honesty, respect, integrity. We taught him that family isn't just about shared blood, but about how we treat the people we love. I paused, noticing James's expression changing from pleasant to concerned, as he sensed this wasn't going in the expected direction. Yesterday at the reception, many of you witnessed something unusual. When I arrived at my designated table, I found a trash can, where my chair should have been, with my name taped to it. Murmurs spread through the room. Some guests who hadn't seen the incident looked shocked, while others shifted uncomfortably. When I asked about it, I was told, "It's just a joke, don't be so dramatic." My eyes met Stephanie's across the room. I've been thinking about that joke all night, about what it means when family becomes a punchline, about the difference between laughing with someone and laughing at them. "Mom," James called out, half rising from his seat. "Maybe this isn't the time." I've sat quietly through 3 years of jokes at my expense. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I've watched as my son was gradually separated from his roots, his past, his family traditions. I've been patient, hoping that time would bring understanding and respect. But yesterday made it clear that respect is not on the menu in this new family arrangement. Stephanie was now furiously whispering to James, her face flushed with anger. Her parents looked mortified, while her bridesmaids exchanged uncomfortable glances. "There's another matter I need to address," I said, pulling my phone from my purse. "Something far more serious than a cruel seating arrangement." "Agnes, that's enough," Stephanie's mother called out, starting to stand. "I recently had a DNA test done," I continued, my voice cutting through the growing tension. "A comparison between my genetic markers, which James shares, and those of Jason, the child my son has been raising as his own for 2 years. The room went completely silent. James froze, his face draining of color. Stephanie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. The results were conclusive. There is 0% chance of a genetic relationship between our family line and Jason. I held up my phone, displaying the email with the results. Jason is not James's biological son. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound that seemed to pull the oxygen from the room. Then came the whispers, the gasps, the shocked exchanges between guests. All eyes moved between me, James, Stephanie, and little Jason, who was happily playing with a piece of toast, oblivious to the bombshell that had just detonated. James stood slowly, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Mom, what are you saying? How could you possibly know that?" "I had suspicions for some time," I admitted. "Jason bears no resemblance to our family. But more importantly, I noticed the way Stephanie interacted with her old friend David at Jason's birthday party. The way he looked at Jason with longing, with love." At the mention of David's name, Stephanie's face crumpled. She grabbed James's arm. "She's lying. She's trying to ruin us because she's jealous, because she couldn't control the wedding. This is insane." "Is it?" I asked calmly. "Then you won't mind taking a proper paternity test to prove me wrong, to prove that the child James has been raising, the child he's financially supporting and emotionally investing in, is actually his son." "This is outrageous," Stephanie's father bellowed, now fully on his feet. "How dare you make such accusations at what should be a happy family gathering?" "Happy family," I repeated. "Is that what we are?" Because yesterday this happy family decided I was literally trash. And while that hurt deeply, it also made me realize that I could no longer stay silent about a much greater deception. James was staring at Stephanie, now studying her face. "Steph, tell me this isn't true. Tell me Jason is mine." Stephanie's silence was damning. Her eyes darted around the room as if seeking escape. "I may be trash in your eyes, Stephanie," I said, my voice softening, "but at least I know the value of honesty." With that, I placed the microphone back on its stand and walked steadily toward the exit, my head held high, despite the tears threatening to spill. Behind me, chaos erupted. Raised voices, accusations, the sound of a glass shattering. I didn't look back. I had done what I came to do, had spoken a truth that needed to be heard regardless of the consequences. In my car, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for the family that was now irrevocably fractured, but for my son, who had just had his world turned upside down on what should have been the happiest weekend of his life. I cried for little Jason, who was innocent in all this, but would bear the consequences. And I cried for myself, knowing that James might never forgive me for being the bearer of such devastating news. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone began to ring. It was Helen. "It's done," I told her, my voice thick with tears. "I told everyone the truth." "Come straight to my house," she said firmly. "You shouldn't be alone right now." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I don't think James will ever speak to me again." "Give him time," Helen advised. "Right now, he's in shock. But eventually, he'll understand that you did what any mother would do. Protected him from a lifetime of deception." I wasn't so sure, but I was too emotionally drained to argue. As I drove toward Helen's house, storm clouds finally broke open, rain pouring down in sheets that matched my tears. Appropriate weather, I thought, for the tempest I had unleashed. The days following the brunch revelation were a blur of anxiety, sleepless nights, and constant checking of my phone. James didn't call. I didn't expect him to. He was dealing with the implosion of his brand new marriage and the devastating news about Jason's paternity. Still, the silence was deafening, a void where my relationship with my only child used to be. On the third day, as I was half-heartedly tending to my garden, my doorbell rang. My heart leapt, hoping it might be James, but when I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Stephanie. Her perfect appearance was markedly diminished. Her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by simple jeans and a t-shirt. "You've ruined everything," she said without preamble, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Are you happy now?" "This isn't about my happiness," I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. "It's about the truth." "The truth?" she scoffed. "You couldn't stand that James chose me, that he was building a life that didn't revolve around his mommy. So you made up this ridiculous story about Jason." "I didn't make anything up, Stephanie. I have the DNA results." "From some mail-order test? That's not proof of anything." I regarded her steadily. "Then take a proper paternity test. Prove me wrong." Her confidence faltered just for a moment before she rallied. "James doesn't want to see you. He says you're dead to him. He'll never forgive you for this public humiliation." The words stabbed at my heart, but I maintained my composure. "James is hurt and confused right now. That's understandable. But I raised a man who values truth even when it's painful." "You raised a man who was easily manipulated until I came along," Stephanie snapped. "A man who needed me to show him how to reach his potential. You should be thanking me for pushing him to succeed." "Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, you isolated him from everyone who truly cared about him, mocked his background, and tricked him into raising another man's child while systematically undermining his relationship with his mother." Stephanie's face flushed with anger. "You know nothing about our relationship." "I know you replaced my seat with a trash can at my son's wedding," I said quietly. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character." For a moment, Stephanie seemed at a loss for words. Then, my parents want you to issue a public retraction, an apology to me and James for the scene you caused at the brunch. If you don't, they're considering legal action for defamation. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Defamation requires a false statement. I spoke the truth, Stephanie, and we both know it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Listen to me carefully. One simple paternity test will prove that Jason is James's son. And then you'll be the bitter old woman who tried to destroy her son's marriage out of spite. No one will believe anything you say ever again. Is that what you want? The threat might have worked if I hadn't been absolutely certain of the DNA results. Take the test, Stephanie. I'll happily apologize if I'm wrong. Our standoff was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. A car pulled into my driveway. Not James's familiar sedan, but a sporty convertible I didn't recognize. A man stepped out tall and handsome with light brown hair and striking green eyes. Stephanie's face went pale. David, what are you doing here? So this was David, the old friend I had suspected, the man with the same distinctive green eyes as Jason. I got your messages, he said, approaching us with a grim expression. All 15 of them. You need to stop Steph. I'm not going to lie for you anymore. How did you find me? She demanded, panic creeping into her voice. Location tracking on your phone, he said with a shrug. You set it up yourself, remember? So we could meet without James suspecting. I watched this exchange in silence, pieces falling into place. You must be Agnes, David said, turning to me with a regretful smile. I'm David Harrison. I believe we met briefly at Jason's birthday party, though we weren't properly introduced. Yes, I remember, I replied, studying the features that Jason had so clearly inherited. The green eyes, the distinctive shape of his nose, the cleft in his chin that was definitely not from my family's genes. David, don't do this, Stephanie pleaded, grabbing his arm. He gently removed her hand. It's too late, Steph. James called me yesterday. He was, well, destroyed is the only word for it. He deserves the truth. We had an agreement, she hissed. That was before you married him, David countered. Before you let him believe Jason was his son for 2 years. I went along with it at first because you said it was temporary, that you were going to tell him eventually. I found my voice. You knew all along that Jason was your son. David nodded, shame evident in his expression. Stephanie and I had been together on and off for years before she met James. When she got pregnant, we were in one of our off periods. She had just started dating James and told him the baby was his. By the time she told me the truth, she was already living with him. And you just accepted that? I couldn't keep the judgment from my tone. I'm not proud of it, David admitted. I was finishing medical school, barely surviving on student loans. I told myself James could provide a better life for them than I could at the time, and Stephanie convinced me it was best for everyone. Stephanie made a sound of frustration. It was best for everyone. James got the family he wanted. I got the stability I needed. David got to finish his degree without the burden of a child, and Jason got 2 fathers who love him. Where's the harm? The harm is in the deception, I said firmly. The harm is in letting my son believe a lie for 2 years, bonding with a child he thought was his own. I've completed my residency now, David continued, ignoring Stephanie's furious glare. I'm established in my career. I never stopped loving Stephanie, never stopped wanting to be a real father to Jason, but she kept stringing me along, saying she'd leave James eventually. So you've been having an affair this entire time? I asked Stephanie directly. Her silence was confirmation enough. James knows everything now, David said quietly. I met with him yesterday and told him the whole story. We're getting a proper paternity test done, but there's no real doubt. I'm Jason's biological father. Stephanie suddenly looked defeated, the fight draining out of her. "You've ruined everything," she repeated, but this time the words were directed at David, not me. "No, Stephanie," he said gently. "We did this ourselves with our choices. Now we have to face the consequences." She turned and walked quickly to her car. Shoulders hunched, no longer the confident, controlling woman who had dominated my son's life for 3 years. As she drove away, David remained standing awkwardly in my driveway. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Wright," he said. "I should have come forward sooner." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "But I'm grateful you're doing the right thing now." After a pause, I asked the question foremost in my mind. "How is James?" David's expression was pained. "Devastated, angry, confused, all the things you'd expect. He's staying with a friend from work trying to process everything." I nodded, my heart aching for my son. "Will you tell him something for me? Tell him that when he's ready, if he's ever ready, his mother is here. No judgment, no, I told you so, just love." "I will," David promised. "For what it's worth, I think he'll come around. He spoke about you with respect even through his anger. He said you were always honest with him even when the truth hurt." It was small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. As David left, I returned to my garden, mechanically pulling weeds, while my mind worked through all that had happened. The revelation at the brunch had set off a chain reaction that was still unfolding, lives rearranging like pieces on a chessboard after a decisive move. The next morning, my doorbell rang again. This time, when I opened it, James stood on my porch. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, his normally neat hair disheveled. Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me in a fierce hug. I held him tightly, feeling his body shake with silent sobs. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered. "For everything." I guided him inside to the kitchen table where we had shared so many conversations over the years. I made coffee, giving him time to collect himself, not pushing for more than he was ready to give. "David told me he came to see you," James finally said, clutching his mug like a lifeline. "He told me what you said." I nodded, waiting. "I was so angry at you," he continued, "for causing that scene at the brunch, for embarrassing Stephanie in front of everyone. I thought you were just being vindictive because of how she treated you." "I understand," I said softly. It was a terrible way to find out. But then I started thinking about all the things that never quite added up. How Stephanie was so protective of Jason around my friends, but completely comfortable leaving him with David. How she always changed the subject when I mentioned that Jason didn't look like either of us. The timing of her pregnancy so early in our relationship. He took a shuddering breath. "We did the official paternity test yesterday. Fast-tracked the results because David has connections at the hospital lab. It confirmed what you already knew. Jason isn't my son." Tears filled my eyes. "I'm so sorry, James. I wish it weren't true." "The worst part is, I love that little boy," James said, his voice breaking. "For 2 years, I've been his daddy. I've changed his diapers, soothed his nightmares, taught him to say ball and truck. How do I just stop being his father?" I reached across the table to take his hand. "Love doesn't disappear because biology says it should. You'll always have a special connection with Jason, even if your role in his life changes." "Stephanie's moving out today, going to stay with her parents until she finds a place. David wants to be involved in Jason's life to co-parent. They're talking about custody arrangements already, like I'm just irrelevant." The pain in his voice was unbearable. "You're not irrelevant, James. You've been Jason's father in all the ways that matter most. That counts for something. I keep thinking about that trash can," he said, abruptly changing subjects. "At the wedding, I didn't say anything. I let her humiliate you, and I just stood there. You were caught in the middle of a difficult situation. No, James said firmly. I was a coward. I chose the easy path, keeping Stephanie happy, instead of standing up for what was right. Dad would have been ashamed of me. Your father would understand that relationships are complicated, I assured him. He would have been proud of the man you are, kind, hardworking, loyal to a fault. Too loyal, James said bitterly. Loyal to the wrong person. We talked for hours, emptying the coffee pot and moving to the living room, as the conversation shifted from the immediate crisis to deeper patterns in his relationship with Stephanie. He described the gradual isolation from friends and family, the subtle put-downs disguised as jokes, the way she made him feel simultaneously special and never quite good enough. Classic signs of emotional manipulation, I observed gently. It happens to intelligent, confident people all the time. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I should have seen it, he insisted. I should have noticed what was happening. When you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see clearly. That's why we need people who love us enough to tell us difficult truths. James looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. Like you did at the brunch. I hated hurting you, I admitted, but I couldn't let you continue living a lie, not when the truth would eventually come out anyway, maybe years down the road when even more damage would be done. Thank you, he said simply, for loving me enough to tell me the truth, even knowing I might hate you for it. I'm your mother, I replied. That's what we do. As evening approached, James reluctantly prepared to leave. I should go. I'm staying with Mike from work until I figure out next steps. You could stay here? I offered. Your old room is always waiting. He smiled for the first time since arriving. Maybe in a few days. I need some space to think right now, but I'll call you tomorrow, I promise. At the door, he turned back. Mom, that DNA test. How did you do it? Jason's sippy cup, I admitted. I know it wasn't entirely ethical, but to my surprise, James laughed. A short, sharp sound with little humor in it. Ethical. After what they did, you did what you had to do. As I watched him drive away, I felt both profound relief that we had begun to rebuild our relationship and deep sadness for the pain he was still working through. The road ahead wouldn't be easy for any of us, but at least we were back on the same path, moving forward together, rather than growing further apart. 6 months passed each day, bringing small healings and new beginnings. James initially stayed with his colleague Mike, but eventually moved back into my house temporarily, while sorting out the legal and emotional aftermath of his brief marriage. Having him home again was a bittersweet joy. I treasured our reconnection, but hated the circumstances that brought him back. The legal proceedings were mercifully straightforward. Since the marriage had lasted less than a week and the deception about Jason's paternity was easily proven, James was granted an annulment rather than having to go through a divorce. Stephanie didn't contest it, perhaps recognizing that she had no ground to stand on after her lies had been exposed so publicly. The more complicated matter was Jason. Though not biologically, his son James had formed a deep bond with the little boy and was devastated at the thought of losing him completely. After several tense meetings with lawyers present, an unusual arrangement was worked out. David would have primary custody as the biological father, but James would maintain visitation rights as an important figure in Jason's life. It's not ideal, James admitted one evening as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, a habit we'd developed during his stay with me. But at least I still get to be part of his life. We're calling me Uncle James now. It feels strange after being Daddy for so long. You're doing the right thing, I assured him. Maintaining consistency for Jason through all these changes. That little boy is lucky to have so many adults who love him. Stephanie's not making it easy, James sighed. She uses every handoff as an opportunity to try to manipulate me into getting back together. For Jason's sake, she says. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to disparage Stephanie. I had adopted a policy of not speaking negatively about her, recognizing that James needed to process his feelings about her in his own way. "What does David say about that?" I asked instead. "He's actually been really decent through all this," James admitted. "Apologetic, respectful of my relationship with Jason. He set firm boundaries with Stephanie about not using Jason as a bargaining chip." David had indeed shown character once the truth was out, taking responsibility for his part in the deception and treating James with respect during their difficult negotiations. He had even reached out to me separately, thanking me for bringing the truth to light, despite the painful way it had unfolded. "How's the new job going?" I changed the subject, knowing James had recently accepted a position with a larger engineering firm in Dallas. His face brightened. "Really well. The projects are more challenging, the team is supportive, and the pay increase doesn't hurt either." He hesitated before adding, "I've been looking at apartments in the city. I think it's time for me to get my own place again." Though I had expected this moment, it still brought a twinge of sadness. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need, but I understand wanting your own space." "I'll still come for Sunday dinners," he promised with a smile. And I was thinking, maybe you could come into the city sometimes. There are some great restaurants I'd like to take you to. Maybe we could see a show at the theater. The invitation warmed my heart. After years of being excluded from his life in Dallas, this represented a meaningful shift. I'd like that very much. As James settled into his new routine, I found myself rebuilding my own life as well. I rejoined my church group, reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the Stephanie years, and even started volunteering at a women's shelter 2 days a week. Helen had suggested it might be healing to help other women dealing with manipulative relationships, and she was right. The women I counseled at the shelter often asked how I had found the courage to stand up for myself at my son's wedding. I told them my story honestly, emphasizing that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary for healthy relationships. Some days, I even believed it myself. 4 months after the wedding debacle, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from a town in Oklahoma I didn't recognize. Inside was a handwritten note from Stephanie. "Agnes, I'm not writing to apologize because I'm not sorry for loving Jason enough to do whatever it took to give him a good life. But I am writing to say that I understand now why you did what you did at the brunch. You were protecting James the same way I was protecting Jason. We're not so different in that way. David and I are trying to make a fresh start here. He's taken a position at a regional hospital, and I'm working remotely for a marketing firm. Jason asks about Uncle James often. He misses him. I don't expect forgiveness or understanding, but I thought you should know that your son made an impact on my son's life that will never be erased, regardless of biology. Stephanie." I showed the letter to James during his next visit. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. "Do you think she's changed?" he finally asked. "I think she's trying to make sense of her choices the same way we all are," I replied carefully. "People are complicated, James. Rarely all good or all bad." He nodded thoughtfully, folding the letter and handing it back to me. "I'm glad they're doing okay, for Jason's sake." It was a small moment of grace in a situation that had contained so much pain, a recognition that healing could happen even without perfect resolutions or tidy endings. Around the 5-month mark, James mentioned casually during a phone call that he had met someone. "Her name is Rachel. She works in urban planning at City Hall. We've had coffee a few times." "That sounds nice," I said, careful not to sound too eager or intrusive. "She's different," James continued. "Thoughtful. Listens more than she talks. No drama." Over the following weeks, I heard more about Rachel. Her passion for historic preservation, her close relationship with her parents, her volunteer work teaching art to underprivileged children. I resisted the urge to offer opinions or ask leading questions, determined not to repeat past mistakes by seeming to interfere with James's choices. 6 months to the day after the wedding revelation, James called to invite me to dinner. "Rachel would like to meet you," he said, "if you're comfortable with that." "I'd be delighted," I replied, meaning it genuinely. From everything James had shared, Rachel sounded like someone who valued the same things we did: family, integrity, kindness. We met at a cozy Italian restaurant halfway between my home and Dallas. Rachel was waiting with James when I arrived, a petite woman with warm brown eyes and a genuine smile that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Wright," she said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm so happy to finally meet you. James talks about you all the time." "Please call me Agnes," I replied, noticing how James's arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, not with the possessive grip I'd observed with Stephanie, but with gentle affection. Throughout dinner, I watched their interaction with growing approval. They took turns speaking, genuinely listened to each other, and shared inside jokes without exclusivity. Rachel asked thoughtful questions about my nursing career and my volunteer work, showing sincere interest in my answers. When she excused herself to the restroom, James leaned forward. "What do you think?" "I think she's lovely," I said honestly. "But what matters is what you think." "I think she's amazing," he admitted, a boyish grin spreading across his face. "It's so different this time, Mom. I can be myself with her. She respects my relationship with you, my past, everything that makes me who I am." "I'm happy for you, James. Truly." Rachel returned, and as dinner progressed, she mentioned that her parents were hosting a barbecue the following weekend. "We'd love for you to come, Agnes. My mom is dying to meet you. James has charmed them completely, and they want to meet the woman who raised such a wonderful man." I glanced at James, not wanting to intrude if this was too much too soon, but he nodded encouragingly. "I'd like that very much." I accepted. As we were finishing dessert, James cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something else. I've been thinking about everything that happened about Jason and my role in his life." I set down my fork, giving him my full attention. "David called yesterday. He and Stephanie are getting married next month. Small ceremony, just family. And they've asked if I would continue being part of Jason's life in a more official capacity. Like a godfather." "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully. "Mixed emotions," he admitted. "Part of me will always feel like I lost a son, but another part recognizes that this might be the healthiest arrangement for everyone, especially Jason. He gets his biological parents together, plus an extra person who loves him unconditionally." Rachel squeezed his hand supportively. "James has been amazing through all this," she told me. "So many men would have walked away completely after what happened, but he's putting Jason's needs first." "That's the man I raised," I said, pride swelling in my chest. "To do the right thing, even when it's difficult." James smiled, a touch of sadness still lingering in his eyes, but also a resilience I recognized from his father. "I had a good teacher." As we prepared to leave the restaurant, I noticed James asking the waiter to adjust our seating arrangement for a moment. When we returned to the table for coffee, I found myself placed at the head in the position of honor. "Just making sure you have the right seat this time," James said with a meaningful look. "The place you deserve." It was a small gesture, but it represented so much. Acknowledgement of past wrongs, commitment to a better future, respect restored. In that moment, I knew that while our family had been fractured, it had healed into something new and potentially stronger. The three of us raised our coffee cups in an impromptu toast. "To family," James said simply. "The ones we're born with and the ones we choose." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From the humiliation of the trash can incident to this moment of quiet celebration, we had traversed a landscape of pain, truth, and ultimately healing. True respect isn't a luxury, but a basic right. Sometimes we must stand up for our own dignity, even when it means shaking the foundations of the relationships we hold most dear. And sometimes, like the empty trash can that once held my name, we discover that what seemed like the end was actually the beginning of something better. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it meant risking a relationship you cherished? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my journey has resonated with you in any way, please like and subscribe to my channel. Sharing these experiences helps us all feel less alone in our struggles. And remember, a relationship built on respect will weather any storm, while one built on manipulation will eventually crumble under the weight of its own deceptions. Thank you for joining me today, and may you always find the courage to stand in your truth, even when it's the hardest thing you've ever done.